Hello, there we go. Great. Thank you everyone for coming. If you don't know, you're sitting at DigiPen. Anyone not familiar with DigiPen out there? Cool, well I'll tell you anyways. We're a 4-year private college focusing on interactive media and technology, something that Kerry is very connected to as well. But what you're here today for, are there Valve fans in the house? Portal fans, yeah? Cool, sweet. Yeah, we're very excited to have you, and Kerry's very excited to talk to you, both about his life experience and his experience working on Valve's VR project, and we're very happy to have you. The schedule will be about an hour talk and a period of Q&A after that. There's also going to be a tour, so if you haven't visited campus before and want to see what we do here, that'll be taking place around 2:30, so you'll have time for the Q&A and the tour. But without any delay, please welcome Kerry Davis from Valve, and we're excited to have you.
Thank you very much. Wow, this is a full house. That's really cool. I'm really excited that you decided to take time out of your weekend to come spend it with me. Maybe you had other reasons, but I'm going to pretend it's for me, and I'm very honored. My name is Kerry Davis. I am a game programmer at Valve, and it's going to be some fun. Since we're on the weekend, I didn't want to do a typical GDC data dump, as one of my coworkers referred to it. So we're going to have a little bit of fun, but I hope to still share some information that will be interesting and maybe useful for you as you go on in your careers. Since this is an open talk, I kind of want to know who I'm talking to today. So by a show of hands, how many of you are currently enrolled students or thinking about enrolling at DigiPen in the future? Excellent, that's a great number. Those extra credit points are going to come in super handy later on. How many of you are friends or family of DigiPen students? A few, okay, that's good. I'm going to call the rest of you our honored community, so thank you for being here. So I'm incredibly passionate about what I do. I've been with Valve for 15 years now, and they have been the most professionally and creatively fulfilling years of my entire life. So let's just say I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing. And I love to share that with people because I am so passionate about it. But that can be tough to do with people who aren't in the industry. You can tell a friend about a song you heard that touched you so deeply that you almost were brought to tears. And they know what you're talking about. They can identify with that. If I tell a friend about a piece of code that I read that was so elegantly structured that just reading it gave me goosebumps, they look at me like I'm crazy. And I can see a few of those looks out here now, and that's okay. It's all right. That's why I'm glad family is here. Because it is difficult to describe, but maybe by the end of this talk, you'll have had a little peek into what makes this field so exciting for those of us who are into it. And the fact that so many of you students are here and have chosen DigiPen to get your education, I know there's a few of you in this room who get what I'm talking about. You understand what I'm saying. Yeah, you get it, right? There you go. So we got a connection going here. That's good. You're gonna understand me. Everyone else, I hope you'll understand me eventually. So, what are we gonna talk about today? Let's take a look. We'll start with my origin story. People always ask me, how did you end up at Valve? And I don't really have an easy answer for that because, to be honest, I wasn't trying to work at Valve. In fact, before I started at DigiPen, I wasn't even intending to work in video games at all. It wasn't even on my radar. So how do you explain something that happened not so much because of my choices, but rather in spite of them, I guess? So I'll see if I can explain that today. Wish me luck. From there, we'll go into my work at Valve, specifically in virtual reality. So I've loved everything that I've worked on at Valve. It's been fantastic, but VR is especially exciting for me, and I'll try to express why that is and explain what makes it so special. At the same time, virtual reality has its issues. I'll look at the other side of the coin and why developing for VR can be incredibly more frustrating than anything else that I've had to do. It is true. Finally, we'll move into a case study of a particular feature that I implemented for VR, and we'll look at the process from the design to implementation to testing and iteration, and we'll look at some of the problems that came out of that and how we chose to deal with them. Now, I know it's unusual to put a bullet point for things that I will not be talking about, but I want to get all the disappointment out of the way right up front. If you wish to leave, please do so quietly. I won't hate you for it. I will not be making any product announcements, and I will not be sharing new details about projects currently in development. Believe me, I am dying to share all the exciting things that we've been working on at Valve. It's killing me, but today is not the time or the place for that, unfortunately. So that said, let's go to a different time and place. The time, the early 1970s. The place, a small farm in rural Minnesota. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere, it's true. But it was a very theatrical household. Both my parents were music teachers, so as far back as I can remember, I was surrounded by musicians and singers and dancers and artists. And so as a kid, naturally, I got caught up in that whole scene. So by the time I was 10 years old, I had entered numerous dance competitions. I was doing a ton of community theater, and I even picked up a few modeling gigs for the local newspaper. I'm number 88. So by this point in my life, I knew what my career was going to be. I was going to be a Broadway star. Maybe do a little television if I needed to, and heck, the movies were not out of the question. But when I wasn't dreaming about my future stardom, I was obsessed with puzzles, brain teasers, and games. And I would burn through these books faster than my parents could buy them. And then in school, my favorite subjects were math and science. Because for me, math problems and science experiments are just another type of puzzle that I got to solve. And better yet, they were teaching us systematic, methodical ways to solve these puzzles, which I found incredibly satisfying. So if you had asked me what my alternate career choice would be, there was no question about it. Scientist. Now, in my 10-year-old brain, scientist was a single monolithic job opportunity, so I wasn't any more specific than that, but it doesn't matter. I have my original career goal. It's the theater. So as I got into high school, I was still doing theater, but I was noticing I was getting more curious about what was happening behind the stage. I was wondering about the craft and the technology that went into creating sets and lighting and stage effects. And then in my junior year of high school, I had an epiphany. You don't need a college degree to be a movie star. So maybe I should use that time to expand my horizons a bit. I could learn how the other side of the theater works. So that's what I did. When I graduated high school, I enrolled at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and I was a technical production major. So, in case you don't know, technical production is exactly what it sounds like. You learn how to do the sets and lighting and costumes and props and everything that goes into creating a theatrical production. But my favorite role was technical director. And I'll tell you briefly what that is. So you have a scenic designer. They use sketches and models and concept art to express their design for the show. Then the technical director takes that information and they build this detailed construction plan at the drafting table about how the entire show should be put together. Then you take this full set of plans, this stack of blueprints, and you send it off to the scene shop, and they can build on the stage an accurate physical manifestation of the designer's creative vision. Now, doesn't that sound like the most ultimate puzzle you could ever have to do? I really enjoyed it. Now, if I had reflected back on my life at this point, I might have seen that there were some patterns emerging, and certainly we all know how this story ends, so we can see the parallels pretty clearly. But as a college student, I didn't set aside a lot of time for self-reflection, so I just forged ahead. What I did discover about 2 years in was that the reality of the job meant I spent a lot of time in the scene shop actually building the sets. And I loved doing that work. I loved learning all those practical skills. If you haven't tried welding, you should. It's awesome. But I spent my days with sawdust in my contact lenses and slivers in my hands and slag burns from the welders, and it just wasn't my favorite thing. So I thought after 2 years, I've built up enough student debt. This experiment has run its course. It's time to go back to my original path. Now, I'm approaching 21 at this point. I can't waste any more time. I need to get serious. I need to buckle down. I need to focus on my career. I need to make things happen. So I decided to move somewhere where I wouldn't have any distractions in my life. Now, there was actually a couple of good reasons that I picked Las Vegas. I'm not totally crazy. I was most successful as a kid with my dancing. So I figured Vegas has a huge range of job opportunities for dancers in a very localized area. So I thought that would be my fastest path back onto the stage. Also, I was turning 21. Why wouldn't you want to live in Vegas? So once again, reality started to come into focus. These dance auditions were not going well, and I was running out of money. And finally, when I realized I needed a job that paid better than dancing on the street corner for tips, I went to the one place in Vegas that everybody goes when they need to make some money. Fortunately, I'm on the good side of the table here. You can't take pictures in the casino, so this was the best I could do. Side note, I realized when I was putting this talk together, this is the first time I was ever paid to play games. A little bit of foreshadowing there. So it turns out that dealing's actually a really good job. The hours are consistent, the pay is great, it's easy to do, and it's even fun sometimes. If you have really good players at your tables, it's a good time. So 1 year turned into 2, 2 turned into 5, and before I knew it, I had spent almost 10 years working in the casinos. I had put down roots in Las Vegas. I was married, I had a house in the suburbs, friends with my neighbors, part of the community. Vegas was my new home. And dealing was a good career, and it's a good thing because the dancing thing, well off the table at that point. In fact, all of my childhood dreams and goals, you know, they're just dreams after all. Put them on the shelf, and you live like an adult. I didn't love my job, but I didn't hate it, so that's better than a lot of people can say. It's certainly not creatively fulfilling by any means, but I kept my mind busy. I learned to count cards. I memorized the numbers on the roulette wheel. I can still recite them in order, clockwise and counterclockwise. So I figured this is my life. That's fine. Then one day I'm flipping through a magazine, and there's an article about this school called DigiPen, and it talks about how they're teaching kids to make video games. And I thought, what a crazy world we live in. Can you imagine a school that teaches you to make video games? And actually at this time, I think there were maybe 2 places you could do that, DigiPen and Full Sail. And that was it. So I kept reading the article, and then I got to the description of a game programmer. And it said that they take the creative vision of a game designer, they use math and science and technology to create a detailed set of instructions, which then produces what is essentially interactive theater. So suddenly, all these childhood dreams flew off the shelf, and I got a little crazy. I thought, this is exactly what I've been looking for. Now I see the parallels, and this time there's no sawdust or slivers. But I'm an adult. I'm established. This is my life now. Am I gonna uproot everything to go on some wild adventure? I won't bore you with the months of internal struggle that I went through. What it eventually came down to was, I had given 10 years of my career to gambling. Why can't I just take one gamble on my career? But I have to be smart about it. I can't have a repeat of Carnegie Mellon. I'm still paying off those student loans, by the way, at this point. So I've got a plan. Here's my plan, the master plan. I go to Las Vegas Community College. I enroll in a 1-semester Java programming class. 2 weeks before class started, my textbook arrived. I went to Circuit City, and I bought my first ever PC. 1 week before class, my textbook was completed, and I had done all of the programming exercises at the end of every single chapter in the book. By the way, this 1-semester class was only supposed to do the first half of the book. 102 was the second half of the book. So the first day of class, I dropped the class. And I sent my application into DigiPen. Now I want to talk a little bit about DigiPen, but we're almost at the end of this story, so let's just wrap it up. Summer of 2004, a local game company is working on finishing their big game project. It's called Half-Life 2. Now I don't know if any of you have played Half-Life 2, but it's a massive game. And Valve, the company that made it, at this time is about 80 people. So they're all crunching to get this thing done. And they did something that's very out of character for Valve. And I want to emphasize, this is out of character. They do not do this in the past, they do not do this today. They decided to hire a couple of contractors to be full-time testers on this game and also manage their bug database, play test sessions, all that kind of stuff. So at the time, I'm at DigiPen, and I'm actually grading for Matthew Mead's freshman CS class. So I bring in the last stack of assignments, and he says, hey, if you don't have plans for this summer, a company called over, they want us to send some students to interview for a summer job. Would you be interested? And I was like, sure. I hadn't heard of Valve, but I'm always open to some extra cash for the summer, so this sounds like a great idea. So, spoiler alert, I got the job. 2 of us were hired, and we spent that summer, probably one of the most amazing summers of my life, I have to say. I was pretty much 24 hours a day in the office playing this game. Fortunately, during that time, I got to know every one of those 80 employees personally. They were great people, very cool. So 2005, summer rolls around, I make a few calls. I said, you know, I'm getting kind of good at this programming thing. Maybe I could come in, just get a taste of what it's like to write code for an actual game company, see what that's like. They said yes. So I got to come in and I worked on the Xbox version of Half-Life 2. And I actually wrote code. I wrote some of the UI, the save load stuff, interface with the console, you know, all the stuff that you give the junior people that nobody else wants to do. I was happy to do it. End of the year rolls around, it's time for me to go back to school for my senior year. I got called into an office and they said, we'd like you to stay. They offered me a full-time job. So, of course, I took it. But I was conflicted because am I really gonna drop out of college and not get a degree for a second time? It just didn't seem possible to me. Anybody who's a student here currently knows this is a grueling program. And I put 3 years into this. I was so close to that finish line. I couldn't let it go by. So somehow, I managed to do both. I worked at Valve full-time, and I kept up with my classes at DigiPen to get my degree. Looking back on it, it was a terrible idea. I wouldn't do it again. But I survived it, and here I am. So, let's go back to DigiPen. So I've told you a story where somebody comes in the first day of freshman class knowing nothing, having only owned his first computer for less than a year. And then 3 years later, I'm a programmer at a game company. How is that possible? I'd love to say I'm some kind of prodigy, and I'm not, I promise. My coworkers can attest to that. I will take credit for working my butt off. It turns out when you give up almost everything to uproot your life and make a career change in your 30s, you're super motivated to not fail at it. So I worked very hard. But still, no matter how hard you work, 3 years is not enough time to acquire the knowledge necessary to just drop into a professional company and hit the ground running. It's just not the case. So, how did it work? Well, it was DigiPen, in my opinion, that set me up for success. And it's because of the philosophy of how they taught things. Professor Comer, he actually taught our freshman CS class. I understand he doesn't do that anymore. I'm so sorry for all of you. It was amazing. But he told us the first day, he said, we don't want to teach you how to write code. We want to teach you what happens to that code when the compiler gets a hold of it, how it's turned into binary trees with operators and operands, and how those are converted into CPU instructions, and how the CPU consumes those instructions, and then runs the processes necessary to put your game on the screen. And that permeated the whole program, every class. So when I started at Valve, I didn't know every important algorithm and when to use it, but I knew how to analyze the performance characteristics of an algorithm and why that mattered. I didn't know how to manipulate every file type, but I knew how to research file formats and how to use that information productively. I didn't know every third-party API. I had never even written a DirectX call. But I knew how APIs were structured, and I knew what they were doing under the hood. And then, most importantly, I didn't know how to ship a AAA game, but I knew how to be a productive member of a game development team and carry a project through to completion. So essentially, DigiPen had given me the foundation that I needed to be able to teach myself on the fly. Every time Valve brought me a task, even if I didn't know what they were talking about, which was a lot of the time, I knew that I could figure it out. I never had to say no, because I had the skills necessary to get the information I needed and do a good job and come up with a good result. So, and that's still a valuable skill today. The pace of technology is changing too fast now. There's not enough hours in the day to sit in the classroom and have someone give you the information to know how to do things. You have to be able to learn that stuff on your own, and you have to be able to do it quickly and efficiently. So these are skills that still serve me today, and I assume always will. So that's why I am a huge advocate for DigiPen. If you're already students here, I don't need to sell you on it, but I just want to tell you what I love about the school. And I credit the staff here, the faculty, and all of their amazing work for helping me get to where I am today. So, let's talk about where I am today. I am currently working on Valve's upcoming flagship virtual reality title. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before, but that's what I'm doing. But VR in general is what I want to talk about. So it's very polarizing developing for VR. Some people love it, some people hate it. I do love it. Some of my coworkers hate it, and they actually have fair reasons for it. So I'm going to cover those first. Why should you hate developing for VR? The reasons are there. First, there's a ton of new hardware coming out, which is great. It means the ecosystem is vibrant, it's alive, things are moving. Hopefully VR is here to stay. But standards are just starting to get nailed down. Compliance is a little bit wonky here and there, especially with controllers. So if you want to sell your games to a wide audience, you have to have all this junk sitting on your desk so you can test it with all this equipment. So I have multiple HMDs, head-mounted displays, on my desk. I have 6 or 7 sets of controllers from different manufacturers. Everything needs to be charging all the time. So there's cords everywhere, HMD cables, they're hanging over the sides, they're wrapped around your chair. Not a day goes by I don't get up from my desk and kick something off and possibly break it. So that can be very frustrating. Collisions are a very real possibility. Now, every time you go into VR, you're essentially blinding yourself to the world around you. If you're playing at home, that's fine. You've set out your place, you know your bounds, you play. I've never had an accident playing at home. In an office setting, we've got 8 or 10 developers all sharing the same tracked area. You've got people walking through the office, little conferences of 2 and 3 at various desks. Collisions are going to happen. It's inevitable. My biggest problem is I like to work at my desk, and sometimes I'll forget I'm at my desk, and I go to reach for the floor, and I plant my face right into the surface of the desk. Fortunately, the HMD has padding, but still, that will get your adrenaline going when that happens. This picture was taken yesterday at the office, so I just added it in. It's kind of zoomed in, so you may not know what you're looking at. If you're not sure, I'll give you a little bit of context. So imagine this is an 80-inch plasma. That's in one of our VR playtest spaces. Thank goodness it was an employee who did that, because if an external playtester did that, I think they would have died from embarrassment. Motion discomfort. A lot is said about getting motion sick from playing in VR. Developers and hardware manufacturers both are really doing a good job of finding ways to mitigate this problem, and it's getting better and better. I'm very sensitive to it, and I rarely get sick anymore. But when you're developing for VR, you're running debug code, which is very slow. You're running assets that haven't been optimized, so they're very slow. You're often looking at a frame rate of 12 to 14 frames, and that is not going to work in VR. You're going to get very sick. You learn to work around it with a lot of caution, but it's tough. And if it goes bad, your whole day is wasted. Focus shift. This is pretty specific to programmers, I think. So there's this concept of being in the zone when you're writing code. So when you're so focused, singularly focused on this task, that the whole world just melts away. All time ceases to exist. It's a wonderful place to be. It's easy, you're productive. It's like meditation where you're getting stuff done. But the zone is very fragile. It's easy to get knocked out of the zone. A phone call, a coworker taps you on the shoulder, that's it, you're out of the zone. And it can take a lot of time and effort to get back into the zone if you're even able to. So there's a problem with VR. Remember I said, before you go out there, there's coworkers and people in the office. Before you test something, you need to take stock of what's around you. You need to know where your coworkers are. Is the cable wrapped around my leg? Are the controllers unplugged? Do I have the right equipment? And all of that is the exact antithesis to being in the zone. So we have a couple of ways to work around it. Sometimes, so you can run our VR games not in VR. So if you're working on a feature that doesn't require you to run in VR, you can run it a traditional flat screen way, and that lets you not get out of the zone. If you have to be in VR, the trick that I use is I build a custom test map just for the feature I'm working on. And I set it up so when the map loads and I'm sitting at my desk, the thing I'm working on spawns exactly to my left. And that way I don't have to care what other people are doing. I run it, put the headset on, turn here, I do my work, turn back, take the headset off, and hopefully I can stay in the zone the whole time. So that's worked pretty well for me. I'm embarrassed to say how long it took me to figure that out, but since I have, it saved me a ton of time. This one's a little more personal to me. I tend to go too long between haircuts, and when I get a little shaggy and I'm wearing the HMD all day, I end up walking around the office. Just sort of that Wolverine look. It's not pretty and it's embarrassing, but that one's not so critical. Now, let's get to the good stuff. Why do I love VR? Wow, there's so many reasons, but I'll just pick a couple. New opportunities for storytelling. I'm a theater guy. I love telling stories, and VR presents so many new ways that we can do it. I don't think we're even scratching the surface yet. But one really cool example is La Perry. If you haven't played it, it actually puts you on a stage in virtual reality. So you can see the theater seats in front of you. If you look to your left and right, you can see off the wings. And when the scenes change, the scenery actually lowers in around you like on a theater. So it's very cool. New puzzles to solve. I've told you how much I love puzzles. So when I came into the industry, it was the end of Half-Life 2. And of course, the first thing I did was just look at everything I could learn about Valve. The company was only 8 years old at that time. So if you think of everything that changed from Half-Life to Half-Life 2, advances in physics and animation and rendering and AI and storytelling, all these huge changes that come along, not just at Valve, but in the whole industry. It was kind of this big wave that had come in, and I showed up right at the end of this wave. And I loved coming back and exploring all these interesting problems that had come along and how people had solved them. But it kind of felt like I was looking at the puzzle already done. And I knew I was going to get to do cool work in the future, but at the same time, I was really going to be building on other people's work. And selfishly, I wanted to be the first person to do something. I wanted to be there solving new challenges. And I mean, look at this gang, this ragtag bunch. This is Valve in 1998. Can you imagine if you could have been a part of this and ridden that wave all the way through Half-Life 2 and everything else that was happening in the industry? Now I realize a lot of you weren't alive in 1998. I was. You know where I was in 1998? So all this was happening, and I felt like I'd missed it. Like maybe I waited too long. It was a bummer. It was a little bit bittersweet. But then VR came along, and suddenly we had a whole new set of puzzles, completely unsolved. And they were big puzzles. It was kind of like the shift from 2D to 3D. I mean, there were huge problems that we didn't know how to solve and nobody had worked on yet. And better yet, the timing was perfect, because I'd been in the industry long enough that I felt like I had built the skill set to actually stake out some ground in this new frontier and do my part to solve new problems. And the idea that the code I write today could potentially be the foundation that future people are building their solutions on. Or the code I write today could be the cautionary tale of what not to do in VR. Either one is fine with me. The point is, I have blazed a new trail, and I have established my spot on turning what VR can be into what it is. So, one problem in VR that's particularly relevant to me as a game programmer is interactions. Interactions have been pretty much the same throughout game history. It's the big dividing line between the game world and the real world. If you want to interact with something in the game, you have to do something in the real world to make that happen through an abstraction layer. So, if you want your character to jump in the game, you have to press the B button on the controller to make him do that. Now with VR, I hypothesized that we can eliminate nearly all of these abstractions. Because if you can put the player into the virtual world themselves, why not just let them interact with the world directly, just like they would in the real world? But this is the question that you have to ask first. And I didn't realize this until a long time later. What are we really trying to simulate? Are we trying to simulate physically accurate real world interactions? Or are we trying to simulate the player's experience of those real world interactions? They're actually two different things, and the distinction is important. To put it differently, are we simulating reality or perception? And this is where I want to take an example that helps highlight the differences. The most basic staple of video games, the door. Doors have always been around. It's hard to build a game world without a door in it. So you have your most traditional, or your most basic doors that are just automatic. They open when you get there, they close when you leave. Not interesting to us, there's no interaction involved. The most common interaction for a door is you push a button on your keyboard, always seems to be E, and the door opens. If you're on a console, you might push the square, and then the door opens. Another example, oh look, we're pushing E again, and the door opens. This goes on and on. We've had this same interaction for decades. It works great, it's easy, it's successful, perfect. So what happens if we try to bring this interaction into VR and see what we can do with it? We're going to set out our goals. First of all, we want to make a VR door interaction feel like the real world. And I want to be a little more specific now. We're going to target doors that you would find in your average home, just so that we know what we're targeting here. Now I propose that an accurate physical simulation of a door in VR will correctly give you the accurate experience of interacting with a door. It's a well-established interaction. Everyone uses them on a daily basis. We shouldn't have to teach people how to use a door. This seems like a no-brainer. So here's my hypothesis. Simulating reality leads to simulating the experience. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to build up our door in 4 stages. We'll go incrementally, we'll add features, and at each stage, we're going to test it against our goals and see how we're doing. You could break it into more stages. I picked 4. It's a nice number. Secondly, we're going to use Valve's Source engine. If you don't know, Source is the name of the game engine that Valve has used to build all of their games since Half-Life. And it's evolved over the years. At some point along the way, we slapped a 2 at the end of it, but it's still Source. So Source already has doors. They work great. We've been shipping in all of our games. This is Left 4 Dead. Let's see how the door works, just so you know. You're gonna walk up to it, you're gonna press the E button, opens, and it closes. There you go. Just like it worked. Great. So let's just take this door, let's put it into VR, and we'll see where we're at. Just what you'd expect. Now in this case, I'm not pressing the E key on my keyboard, I'm pressing a button on my VR controller. Same idea. So, if this suits your game design in VR, you're done. That's fine. This is a time-tested solution. Go with it. If it works for your design, there's nothing wrong with that. Just because we're in VR, so what? But let's see how it matches up to our goals. First of all, does it simulate reality? You might be surprised to hear I'm going to say yes. That's because you could have a mechanical door with a remote activator and you push a button on the remote, the door opens, push a button, the door closes. Sure, why not? All right, does that simulate the experience? Well, I will tell you, if you'll trust me, I recorded that video, I pushed a button on the controller, the door opened, I pushed the button, the door closed. So yeah, that was a perfectly accurate simulation. Does it meet our goal? Well, remember, we're looking for doors you find in the average home. Maybe Bill Gates has these kind of doors. I wouldn't call his home typical. We're gonna go ahead and say no, this does not meet our goal of simulating reality. Let's go to our second door. We're gonna call this the interactive door. So our requirements here are to give the player control over how far open the door is. Right now with the classic door, it's either fully open or fully closed. You have no other choice. We're gonna give the player a choice. I'm saying door angles, so we're gonna refer to it in the form of its rotation around the vertical axis. So we'll say 0 degrees rotation is closed. That's a closed door. 90 degrees forward is an open forward door, and then opening the other way would be negative 90 degrees rotation. Now we also need to let the player grab the door in order to be able to control how far it's open. That could be a little bit trickier. I think I'm going to show you, yeah. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to let the physics engine handle this simulation. Source has a very robust physics engine. It's been used in many games, so we're going to take that to our advantage. Since doors are physical in the real world, let them be physical in the game. This also gives us the emergent behaviors. If something like an explosion goes off near the door, the force is going to throw the door around just like it would in the real world. If you're simulating the door by other means using code, every time you have a new behavior come along, you're going to have to write custom code for that. So this is a good solution, I think. And the way that we'll attach the hand, we'll continue the physics chain. We'll just attach the hand with another hinge to the door, so that way when the player moves their hand, the door will follow along. All right, here's the setup of our interactive door. This is a screenshot from Hammer. Hammer is the name of the tool that we use to build maps for Source. So the yellow box is the hinge. We have the white line there, that is the axis of rotation, so the door can't flip end over end, it can only go around the hinge. And on the other side, we've added a handle. And you see this weird green hand. It's out of the scope of this talk, but I'll give you an overview. It's called a hand pose. It only shows up in the tools, not in the game. And what it does is defines what pose the hand should take when it's interacting with the spot. It also has the ability to send messages to other objects in the game. So this is also going to be responsible for creating the hinge that attaches the hand when you grab the handle. And then when you release the handle, it will remove the hinge. That's the idea. All right, seems pretty good. I mean, it behaved in the way that we expected. Let's check our scorecard. Does it simulate reality? Well, you don't see a lot of 360-degree hinges like that. They do exist. Sure, why not? It seemed pretty real. Does it simulate the experience? If you were interacting with that kind of door, I think this is how it behaves. So yes, again, you don't find these in the typical home. You can't close it for one thing, and if you did have it in your home, it would beat the heck out of your walls. So no, not a good idea. So we need to go on to our third. This is the latching door. So the first thing we want to do is add limits to the hinge. This we kind of get for free. Source hinges have a bunch of data you can set on them. So what we're going to say is the min rotation is, or the max rotation is 0 degrees, that's closed. And then we'll go from there to negative 90. So this door opens toward the player. There, done. Next, we need a way to latch the door. This will take a little bit more work. We don't have an existing latch entity in Hammer. So this is our automatic latch mechanism that we're going to make. Just so everybody's on the same page, this is what I mean by a latch. Most of you are hopefully familiar with this. If you don't know what this is, I don't know where you're from, but welcome. Happy to have you here. So I'm going to call this state extended, and then when it would be pushed in that frees the door, that will be retracted. By the way, a lot of you are programmers, you're students here. It may seem like I'm being a little bit pedantic about defining all of these terms. I've been doing this for 15 years. I work with some of the smartest people in the world, And you would not believe how easy it is to talk across each other and be talking about different things. You're always defining your terms. Every conversation we have, the first thing we do is define what we're talking about, because otherwise you're just gonna have chaos. So that's why I'm doing that. All right, we're gonna simulate the behavior in code. I'm not going to create a physical latch that we attach to the door. That seems a bit excessive. If you want to, go for it. Fun exercise, but not for today. So let's simulate the automatic latch. We have to think about how it's gonna work. We have a couple of states. I already mentioned two of them, retracted and extended. I'm gonna add a third state. This is kind of a pseudo state. This is latched. This would be when the door is closed at 0 degrees rotation and the latch is extended. It is now latched. Technically, this is the state of the door, not of the latch, but if we keep everything in one place, it's gonna be cleaner and simpler. So let's just do it. Now we need a way to actually control the latch. These are our inputs. We already have this great hand pose that can send messages, so that's gonna do it for us. When we grab the handle, it's gonna retract the latch. When we release the handle, it's going to extend the latch. And we don't need an input for latched because that's automatic. If the latch extends and the door is at 0 degrees rotation, it is now latched. All right. Now this is all gonna be happening in code. We can't see what the code's doing. So I add a little bit of debug visualization. So we've got this sphere on the door. If it's green, we're retracted. If it's orange, we're extended. And it's red when we're latched. Simple enough. Now latched. You can close the door. Finally. See if the hinge works. Yep, the constraint makes sense. And throw the door closed. Good. All right. I'm pretty happy with this. I know it's only our third iteration. We have one more to go, but this is pretty good. So let's check our scorecard and see how things went. All right, we have a problem. Something went wrong in testing. Now I want to point out, in reality, I don't bring people in to test a feature until I have it to what I consider a point of completion, and that's how this worked as well. But for the purpose of the talk, I've taken all the testing that was at the end of the process and slotted it in where it's relevant. I just don't want you to think I'm encouraging you to pester your classmates and coworkers every time you make an incremental change to your features, because they're gonna hate you for it. But here we go. We ran this test, something went wrong. Players are not able to open a one-way door. That's kind of odd. Now I get, when they get to the door, we haven't really told them which way it opens, but there's only two choices. So maybe you'll guess the wrong way. You would think you would correct for that and move it the other way. So why is this still not working? It turns out the failed attempt leaves the hand in a bad position. And I'll have to explain this a little bit. This is some fascinating stuff. So we have learned in our experiments that your kinesthetic sense in VR is very malleable. So kinesthetic sense is your awareness of where your body and all of its parts are. So in VR, typically, your hand, the virtual hand, is going to be in the same place as your physical hand. They follow each other, it makes sense. It's actually possible to move the virtual hand a surprising distance away from your physical hand before the player notices anything is wrong. Now, I haven't done a ton of study on this. My wife is the one who is working on her master's in psychology, so maybe she can look into it for me. But it's super useful. We actually take huge advantage of this throughout our entire game. All of our interactions rely on the fact that you don't actually know where your hand is, and you think it's where we tell you it is. But this is a problem right now because they've gone up to a door. Let's do it this way. They grab the handle. This is the door. They push forward. It didn't move. Now, in the game, their virtual hand is still here on the handle. Their physical hand is out here. In their mind, it is already corrected for that. In their mind, their hand is back here. Maybe a little past, but not much. So they think all they want to do is pull back a little bit and try the other direction. What they're really doing is pulling back here and not going far enough to completely move the door. So now the player is actively fighting with the door like this. And their hand the entire time is on the wrong side of the door, so it's not moving. So they come away and they say, well, it's locked, or it's disabled, or it's broken. And this happened consistently. So this is a problem. Well, how do we tell the players which way the door opens? We can use visual clues. I admit we don't have door trim, we don't have hinges, the position of the door in the frame. All these are ways you can tell which way a door opens. They're somewhat art style dependent. We're trying to get a general solution here, so I don't want to have to rely on the art to tell you how the door works. Well, let's look at our scorecard. Simulates reality, yeah, very much. The experience is failing. So this is actually the first counterexample to my assertion that the closer we get to reality, the closer we get to simulating the player's experience of reality. This just broke. And of course, this doesn't meet our goals. How do we solve it? Well, I mean, the players want to play, right? Half your players are going to try to push the door, half your players are going to try to pull the door. All the players just want to get through the door so they can continue playing the game. So just let them do that. It's a little bit sad, but yeah, use a two-way door if you can. It's not common, it's not unacceptable. It feels like a cheat. But here's the interesting thing. When players play through a bunch of doors that open both ways, they very rarely realized that they could have opened the door the other direction. They didn't know they were two-way doors. And that's because the experience was accurate. They went to a door, they decided, by whatever means, that this is the way it's going to open. They tried it, it worked, they walked through it, and they kept playing. As simple as that. If later down the road, they discover the doors actually open both ways, and they didn't always, they'd be surprised. They usually comment on it. Oh, look, I can open it both ways. But then they'd continue. They weren't upset. They didn't throw the headset down in anger. They were fine with it. So just use it. Most of your players, it's invisible, and the ones it's not, they don't care. If you need to have a one-way door, I realize this is an actual case. Come up with interesting ideas. You can put signs on it, push, pull. You can design the handle, a push bar, obviously you can't pull, stuff like that. Obstacles that show you which way it can't open. These are fun experiments for you to try. I know you have VR setups here at the school, so it'd be interesting for you to try to build a one-way door and see if you can find solutions that clue your testers in to always get it right without kind of realizing that they're being told that information. All right, let's move on to our fourth door. This is going to be the fully simulated real-world door. This is guaranteed to succeed. We're going to accept the two-way thing for now. I know it pulls the needle a little back from reality, but this is a spectrum. We get to choose where the cutoff is. We're going to accept the two-way door. Interactive latch. Right now, you can't grab the handle without releasing the door. That's kind of a problem. Even more, you can't slam the door shut while you're holding the handle because the latch is retracted. So we're going to try and solve that by giving you a lever-style handle that you can use to control the latch. And again, this is what I'm talking about. So here's our nifty latch. We've already learned about that. And then here's the handle. So the way that we simulate this, again, is out of scope for this talk, but I'll give you the overview. We have a type of animated model. It's called an animinteractable. It's a mouthful to say, and I hate typing it out, but that's what it is. So we'd have a handle, it's a model that has an animation that goes from 0 to 90, just like this. And what happens is when you interact with it, it follows your hand, the animation does. So as you rotate your hand, the animation plays so that it matches what you're doing. And then again, this can send messages, fire outputs to other entities. So what we're going to do is when you rotate the handle to 90, we're going to retract the latch. When you release the handle back to 0, we're going to extend the latch. That should be good. Handle. There we go. The latch is changing, just like we wanted. All right, very nice. I don't know if you noticed the creaking of that. I'm not talking about it today, but our sound designers do some really cool stuff. It used to be the door just opens and you just play a sound. It plays for as long as the door animates and you're fine. In this case, the player can be standing there swinging the door back and forth. The sound needs to match that, so they actually have a way to play the creak sound. You can change the pitch, the volume based on how fast the door is moving. It's really cool stuff. So when our flagship VR project is released, I hope you'll go around to some doors and play with the sound. I forgot to mention. Since we can control the angles of the latch, of the hinge, I just add a little thing when the door is closed and latched. We take that full range of the hinge and compress it down to just a little narrow range. So the door still moves, but just a little bit, and it gives you this kind of jiggle effect. You passed it. So I thought we were going to look at the scorecard, but it looks like we have another test failure. Like, this is kind of cascading. Things are falling apart here. We're getting closer to reality, and it's not working. What have we got? All right, so players don't turn the handle. And I'm ashamed to say, this is what they say. I didn't know I had to. And, this is when you as a developer can get fairly antagonistic towards your playtesters. You have to refrain from the urge to say, have you never used a door? How did you get into the building? Did somebody escort you? It doesn't make any sense. Why aren't they turning the handle? All right, well, here's the first big lesson that doesn't just apply to doors, but to VR in general that we picked up. We can't automatically assume that real-world interactions translate to the VR world. Why not? Why shouldn't we? Well, here's the thing. Experienced players know technology has not reached a state where we can accurately simulate an entire real world in the virtual space. It's just not possible. So they expect that they'll be able to do some things, and they won't be able to do other things. Even worse, inexperienced players have no expectations, so they don't try anything. They just stand there. So how do we solve this? Well, we need to inform players of what they can and can't do by some means. Now, you might say, why can't we just have the players explore the world and figure out what they can and can't do? Well, this is why. If you make your player try every single thing in the world to find out what works and what doesn't, it can be very fatiguing. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying this is a bad design decision. I am saying it needs to be a decision. If you're making a game where your players are trying everything and learning through trial and error, and that wasn't your intentional choice, then you're probably giving them a really frustrating experience. If you made it a choice, that's fine, that's your game. Try to make it good, don't make them work so darn hard. All right, so what's our latching door scorecard? Well, yeah, this is the most realistic door we've had. It looks pretty good. Turn the handle, you slam it shut, it works great. The experience is falling apart at this point. People can't even get through the door anymore. So we've pretty much proven that my hypothesis was wrong. Jim, question?
If you can't get through a door in the real world, what do you do?
In the real world?
I would argue.
You would think.
I would be the antagonistic on that.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is people didn't. Like I say, I think experienced gamers are used to the game doing everything for them, so they don't think about the fact that they have to treat it like the real world. Believe me, it made me very angry. I'm ashamed to admit. As the person who put so much work into making this realistic. Yeah.
It's gonna sound a bit weird, but why not, like in the first door in the game, so to speak, have like a little tutorial that says you actually have to turn the handle to do it.
I think that's a great point. Let's look at that. We can teach the gesture. We can add a tooltip or an icon. See, look, you're one slide ahead of me. I knew this was a smart bunch. I don't even have to give this talk. You guys already know this stuff. But we do have a bigger problem, and this was a very subtle problem. Interacting with the door still takes conscious effort. Even after the player has been trained, you've taught them how the handle works, they know how the handle works, they can get through a door now. But it still takes attention. You have to make sure your hand is in range of the handle. You have to know when you've turned it far enough. You have to know when the door is released so that you can open it. And these all force you to pay attention to this interaction. And that's because in the real world, we have all these subtle physical elements that feed back into our system. Your brain is doing all these evaluations. The second you grab a handle that you're not even thinking about, it can tell which axes the handle can rotate on right away. It can tell when the handle is turned all the way because it stops moving. You can tell when the latch has been released because the door suddenly moves. This is all feedback that we don't get in VR, and we don't have a way to give you that in VR yet. I would love it if one of you would figure this out in the next few years. That would be so cool. But the point is, they take attention, and our goal is to simulate the player's experience of a real-world door, which is actually a complete non-event. You never think about going through a door. How many of you thought about any of the doors you walked through when you came in here? Probably not at all. So we have to be able to simulate that. The doors in VR need to be a non-event, just like in real life. And this is where you have to be willing to eat crow as a dev for the good of the game. We go back to what worked, the auto retract on the latch. So when you grab the handle, the latch automatically retracts, the door works, everything's fine. It frees your players to play the game. But I want to say all is not lost. First of all, we don't have to take away the hardware we've done on the handle. You can still let the latch follow the handle. The only thing we've changed is for a door that is closed and latched, when you grab it, the latch retracts. That's it. So let's do something else. We have a handle that can play animations. So we can teach this interaction very subtly. When the player grabs the handle, instead of just retracting the latch, let's also play the animation of the handle doing this. It would look like this. So I don't have split screen here, but the player in this case is not moving their hand, just grabbing the handle. And yet, this is what you see in the game. So I'm thinking, all right, this is a compromise. It looks nice. Maybe it teaches them to actually do the interaction. That'd be kind of cool. Even better than that, similar to the one-way doors, when players tried this out, they didn't know that the handle had moved their hand for them. They thought they did it. Even if you watched them on the recording, they hadn't moved their hand at all. But it's because it so accurately simulates their experience of reality that their brain told them that they had done it just like in the real world. They just walked up, the door worked, they went through it. And it didn't occur to them that they hadn't done the work themselves. Yeah?
You can say grab the handle,
Yeah.
but with controllers that aren't the index controllers,
Mhm.
a variety of buttons that you
Yes.
use. Some have grip speed, some don't. And the index, sometimes you use closing your fingers around the controller, but that requires people walking around without their hands.
Right. So yeah, I've been pantomiming this with the index controllers because that's what I have in my hand on a daily basis. Any control that you're using, is going to have some kind of a use input or an interaction, the way you pick things up or grab onto stuff. Often the trigger, usually trigger is the most common. So it'll be whatever it is they're using. But by this point, that abstraction, which you can't get rid of unfortunately, so it's kind of violating my assertion that you don't need abstractions anymore. It's still a little abstraction. But that's sort of dependent on the hardware, and they've sort of accepted that. They're comfortable with the trigger being a grab. Is there another question?
For the one-way door, have you considered using the relevant movement of the hand instead of the absolute position?
Yes. That has other implications that come out of it because now you need to figure out when to rejoin the two. And that presents a whole set of problems in itself. We actually do have ways that we do that now because of the fact that we rely on separating the virtual and physical hand. We have systems in place that once an interaction has begun, we do bring the two together subtly so you don't notice that things are being fixed up. But it didn't turn out to be the best solution. I would encourage you to explore that solution though, because I'm sure it can be done, maybe better than we've done it. That's one of the crappy things about being on a deadline is you just got to make things work sometimes. And I want to spend months and months just researching and exploring all of this, but I have a game to ship. I'm sure you want us to ship it as well. So we've got into this pattern. Oh, this is a freebie. I'm going to show you this. So we've already got this animated handle interaction. So how do we message a locked door? Exactly the same way. Just play a locked animation on the handle. And this has never failed to message a locked door to a player. 100% success. So that's pretty cool. Simulates reality. Well, no, we've come pretty far back from reality now. I've never had a handle in the real world that moves itself outside of my control. But yes, it simulates the experience. In fact, the change was the thing that made me feel better about doing these dirty things. Before this, there was a lot of feedback. Doors are a pain. Doors are annoying. Like, maybe we need to get rid of doors. It was bad. And after these changes went in, feedback turned to nothing. Never heard a word about doors again. And if you're trying to simulate something that's meant to be a complete non-event, then no feedback is the best feedback that you can get. So that made me feel better. So at this point, yes, we have a door that simulates the experience. I'm gonna say this meets our goals. It's the last example. Anyway, so we can't make any more changes. Does this mean I can be done? I can put doors aside and go work on the next task? Never. It's never that simple. VR is vicious. So, we're at the end of the talk now. I'm not gonna go into these in detail, but I'll give you the idea. Door state is no longer atomic. Classic doors, they're either open or they're closed. That's it. So, when is a virtual reality door open? Is it open when I've just cracked it and can see through to the next room? Or is it open when it's all the way at 90 degrees and other characters can walk through? We need to figure that out. Not just open and closed, but also opening and closing used to be atomic states. It's doing one or the other. Now if I'm holding a door like this, it's constantly changing between opening and closing. If it's a two-way door and I go past the threshold, now a closing door has turned into an opening door. How does that affect your game code? Physics stability. Now, this is just kind of a technical aspect. We've got a hand that's welded to a physics object that's attached to a hinge. You want this all to be stable and work correctly. What happens if something gets in the way of the door? How does that affect the simulation? What happens if the player just starts waving their arm around like a wild person? Does it just rip the door off its hinges? It used to. It used to. That was very frustrating. Accidentally pushing the door around. We talked about kinesthetic sense. Even if you know where your body is, you still don't necessarily know where other things in the virtual world are because you can't feel them. So say you open a door to here. Your hand is now on the other side of the door. You release, you relax, and you've now just pushed the door back closed again. This would happen a lot. You can write code to try to prevent that, but now what about the player who's opened the door, changed their mind, and wants to close it again? And now that doesn't work. So how do you determine the player's intent in this case? The same thing happens with relatches of two-way doors. I'm gonna open a door and push it away from me, just like this. So I go up, I grab the handle, I get a little wind up, which pulls the door towards me. I push and release, the latch extends, the door hits 0 angles and latches itself again. How do you figure this out? How do you get this to work correctly? How do NPCs interact with physics doors? They've been interacting with classic doors fine. What do they do here? If there's an NPC standing in the doorway and you want to close the door, with a classic door, we just ignore that key press. No, we're not going to close it, there's something in the way. In VR, you can't do that. Level designers, your best friends and your greatest enemies. As soon as you show them your awesome new virtual reality doors, they're going to want to put them on angles. And they're going to want to put them upside down. And they're going to want to use them as trapdoors. The math is going to explode. Study your quaternions. You can't survive without them. So, what have we learned? Know your simulation. Are you trying to simulate reality or perception? You can do either. If you're making hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, and if you don't know what that is, you can look it up. You're going for perfect physical reality simulation, that's fine, that's your choice. Make sure it's intentional. Know what you're trying to simulate. Set your goals, and make sure what you're doing fits those goals. Increasing the accuracy of the simulation does not result in a more realistic experience. I have just proved that. I was dead wrong on my assertion. I admit it. I have learned from my mistakes. Only rigorous testing will tell you what suits the goal you're trying to meet. You have to test the heck out of it. And don't get mad at your testers. Don't claim they don't know how to work the real world. They do. It's your fault that they can't figure out what they're supposed to be doing. And we can't assume real world interactions automatically translate to VR. We still need to teach players somehow what they can and can't do in the VR world. Or if you choose not to do that, make that an intentional decision and know why you're doing that. So, all of you are in a really cool place right now. Students anyway. I feel like you're going to be coming into the industry right when VR is really hitting its stride. You know, I want to say, I feel like it's here to stay, but it's still working its way up. It's still building speed. You're going to enter it right at the sweet spot. So you're gonna get to ride this wave through the really cool stuff. I wanna see what you're gonna come up with. Think about new ways to tell stories. Again, theater geek, I love a good story. So please, entertain me. That's what I wanna do in VR. It's a fertile ground for interesting, innovative solutions. There's tons of problems to solve, a lot of low-hanging fruit. The opportunities that are in front of you are gonna be incredible. And finally, enjoy the journey that you're on. You heard my story. Let me quickly summarize. Here is a graph representing my life, not to scale. Here are various career goals I made through my life, the paths I intended to take to reach them, and then how things actually turned out. So at some point, some of you in this room, during your education, are going to decide this is actually not the path for me. That's okay. Don't feel like a failure. Don't be discouraged. Something sparked an idea in you to come to DigiPen because something was drawing you to it. Even if you don't finish out here, you've still traveled in a direction towards that place that you ultimately will be happy. It's a vector field. Just because the vector you're on is pointing nowhere near your ultimate destination, just keep traveling from vector to vector. Follow the flow, and even the place you end up may be some place you completely didn't expect. It will be the place that you want to be and will be happy. Just watch out for local minima. They can be a real pain. That's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you, Kerry, appreciate it. Great, yeah, we're gonna have a Q&A portion. We'll just do it by hands. If you could say your question nice and loud, I'll repeat it then, and Kerry can answer. Yeah, we'll start down here on the right.
I never knew yours.
I know.
What I wanted to ask you is, when you mentioned that some of the testers weren't trying out the app, and they were saying, I didn't know about it before. I was wondering if those testers have like hundreds of hours of experience in non-VR. Maybe that might be baggage for what people do. So like, it takes somebody like my wife, with her in VR, she's barely ever played, she can go with lap and just drive it. So I kind of wonder, do you think it might be the nature of
That absolutely impacts it. So like in the case of your wife who doesn't play games, as I said, those people often just stand there and then don't do anything because they're paralyzed, they don't know what to do. But if you had told her, go walk through that door, you're right, she might grab the handle and turn it because that's how she knows they work. Existing gamers, and that's the thing, is VR right now is expensive. You need a high-powered PC. The people that are playing this stuff right now are mostly gamers, and they have a lot of baggage. They've been playing these games forever. They have a language that they speak about interacting with a game, and every time you have to violate that, it puts up this struggle. They think this is supposed to happen. You're like, no, it's different now. This is a new world, and it's really difficult to express that to them. It's hard to retrain people on how to play a game.
Yeah, we can move right to here.
How long did it take to get from iteration 1 to the last iteration?
Yes, this question's about evolving iterations of each door model.
Yeah, I should have anticipated that question. Let's see. The weird thing about this business is time sort of doesn't exist in general. If you told me how long I've been doing something, I might say 3 months and then look back at the record and see that it was 3 years. I'm gonna say that from day one to getting to what our final implementation was, without the solving the problems, just building it out was maybe a month, I would say, to get to the final version.
Time?
In actual me time, yeah. And I kind of glossed over, like these were very simple incremental changes, but in reality, there's pages and pages, hundreds of lines of code behind all of that to actually run the logic and drive it. It looks super simple from the outside, but there's actually quite a bit that happens inside there. So it took time to get everything working. But then the solutions, that took a little while. I was resistant. I wasted time not wanting to do the things that it seemed like were the only way to fix it. I wanted to find better solutions. I didn't want to give up my dream of an interactive door.
Cool. Let's jump over to the left side, far left, yeah.
That in your flagship game, you can't jiggle the door or open it with the automatic version?
That you can't?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you'll have to play it and find out.
Yeah, how about also on that same row at the end there?
We know because of an update to the lab that more locomotion techniques have been added. I believe this was sometime in 2017, 2018. Valve was a strict teleport only philosophy. What caused this shift? And we know because of leaks that in your title there has been a shift in locomotion techniques.
So at that time I wasn't in VR, so I'm not certain of the assertion that we were a strict teleport only. Sometimes it's, this hardware's coming out, and of course hardware has much harder deadlines than programmers. We programmers don't care. But we have to hit the deadline, you've got to get the lab done, you have to ship it. And teleport is the most straightforward solution. As we all play games more, so I get sick, I can't do continuous motion, but I wish I could. Because I agree that that would be the best way to experience a game in VR, if you can stomach it. The idea of the sort of dash, where it's like a quick teleport, I can kind of manage that, but there's general agreement within the company that these are options that are important to people. It's kind of like shipping a game without mouse invert. Why would you do it? You know, once you know how to do it, and that's part of it, sometimes you just don't know how to solve these problems because it's a complicated problem. But if you know how to solve it, just give the ability to the players so they can play the way they want. Especially because these are the early adopters, these are the people that need to be happy with your product so that VR survives and continues to grow.
How about in the back with the aperture shirt?
Well, I was wondering just how collision and VR developing for collision, because I've messed around with Unreal sometimes, and I try making like a physically accurate character, and when I pick up objects, I didn't really work too hard on this, but sometimes you would like pull it to you and then you just go flying, and like all these things can happen if you try to simulate that kind of.
Yeah, that is an extremely difficult problem, I agree. How do you simulate physical reality in virtual reality? How do you keep from picking up something in the game and not just shoving it through this table, because none of them are solid, but your hand is gonna move. So what happens when your hand moves through the object? Now it's at the table. What happens when you continue moving your hand down and through? How do you solve all of that? Again, it's just, you have to make a decision of what you want it to do, make a deliberate design choice. Here's how it behaves. Either your hand becomes invisible, or the object becomes non-solid, or whatever your solution is, pick it and then try to make it work. I still don't know what the best solution is. That's the kind of stuff that people are gonna have to continue to figure out.
Up front here.
Probably the most surprising thing to me from your talk was talk about how malleable the kinesthetic sense is.
Yep.
I was just wondering, like, how extreme can you go with that? How much can you convince someone?
Surprisingly extreme. One of the things, so a few things we've discovered, I'll just give you briefly. If you go up to pick up something, you know, you can't feel it, right? You can't, normally you put your hand against it, and that's when you grab, so when you feel it touch your hand. So in VR, people will often grab early. So if I grabbed here, it turns out I can actually take your virtual hand, move it to the bottle, attach it, and now you're carrying it around like this. And then as you're moving it around, it just very gradually works its way back into your hand. You don't even notice it. And players really don't pick up on that. Because again, it's the experience. I intended to do this. That's what I wanted to happen. What I really did was this, but what I saw happen was this. And so we've made the experience realistic enough that they buy into it. One thing, just an interesting tidbit, orientation differences are very jarring. So if I bring my hand in this way and I rotate it, and then the bottle does this, players can feel that. Having your hand rotated wrong, it immediately tells you something's wrong. Position, not so much. You can move the hand all over the place, and people just don't really notice. It's interesting.
How about from this side? Yeah, how about back there, the blue sweatshirt?
What advice do you give to students who are looking for
Looking toward what?
Work at Valve one day. What
Oh,
advice
to work
would you
at
give
Valve
to
one day?
students who are hoping to work at Valve?
So, in general, Valve looks for at least 10 years of industry experience. That's mainly because we do not have a good mentoring structure in place. Valve is a very autonomous, every employee is kind of on their own. That doesn't mean we don't work as a group and team, but you're responsible for your work. So you need to be able to come into the company and just, like I said, hit the ground running and be successful. So that's why we look for industry experience. The main thing is just do the work as much as you can. You know, working at other companies if you can, build that experience. If you're not getting jobs in the industry, do stuff on your own, making mods, download Unity, make your own games. If you spend 5 years just making games yourself, that might be enough because you've built up a skill set and you have a portfolio that you can show. So that's really it. Valve is we have to have people that have a lot of experience because we kind of leave them on their own. So, you know, new students straight out of college are really going to flounder in that environment.
How about in the back? Yeah.
So, first of all, I just want to say I've been kind of live tweeting this event, and the response to some of the things that you've been saying is just great. If you don't mind.
For the record, I have made a point to not want to see what the internet says about me because they're never nice, but go ahead.
Let's hear some nice things from the stream.
There are 3 questions that if you're willing to give like short or even just one-word answers to.
I can try to be brief.
That would be amazing. So first one is if you guys know about or like the Zero Project Boneworks.
Have you heard of Boneworks?
Those guys are at the office all the time. Yes, we know them very well. They have played our stuff, we play their stuff, yeah.
The second one is what is your favorite Half-Life chapter?
Favorite Half-Life chapter?
Half-Life 1 or 2?
I
I'm more familiar with 2. Ravenholm definitely is my favorite.
And the last one is the most important one. So I know that you said you wouldn't be making any announcements, but is the flagship VR title still planning to be announced/released this year as was previously announced?
I do not know. And that is an honest answer because, like I said, Valve is a very autonomous department. That is not my choice to make, and I haven't been in the meetings that are making that decision. My daily goal at Valve is to keep pushing the project forward, writing code, fixing bugs, making it awesome. And the day will come where the word will come to the office and it's like, okay, we're announcing tomorrow. And that's when I'll know about it. So I honestly can't answer. Yep.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to see how we're looking for time, see how many more questions we can get in. There will be some extra time after to talk to Kerry as well. Yeah, why don't we go back here to DigiPen student John.
Ooh, DigiPen student.
So, in your experience with Valve, what was the most challenging problem you had to overcome?
Yeah, the most challenging problem is it's a pretty dry story and it's a difficult one to explain. I will see if I can give you the high-level summary. Only the programmers here are going to understand what I'm talking about. When we shipped Half-Life 2 on the Xbox 360, the 360 is a big Endian architecture. PC is a little Endian. All of our content, maps, models, animations, physics files, textures, everything in the game was big Endian format. And we use flat file formats. So it's all headers with offsets into other parts of the file, with headers with offsets backwards into earlier parts of the file. Fine. I wrote the code that took all of the content for Half-Life 2 and transcoded it from big Endian to little Endian. That meant I had to reverse architect the entire file format because I wasn't around when that was made and do that work. And then the last thing I'll mention, Xbox 360 cannot load floating point numbers that are not 4-byte aligned. And there was a bug in our files that allowed some floats to be misaligned. So that meant as I was processing them, when I hit one of those misaligned floats, I had to shift the whole rest of the file, say 2 bytes, and then I had to go back and update all of the offsets that crossed that boundary so that they were correct. And there might be 10 or 12 of those boundaries, and I was constantly updating it all. And I had to do that because they said, we're not going to regenerate the content, it's already here. And then by the end of the project, we had enough optimizations in place that we rebuilt all of the content.
Great. Let's jump over to the left side here. How about you?
So part of the Valve mythos for a long time has been that developers can move between projects. How often does that actually occur, both holistically and for an individual person?
I would say it occurs at specific points. So when a project is about to ship, they will send out a request for people to pile on and help them finish it. There's often a shift there. Certainly when projects are spinning up and down, a new project starts, people on other projects might want to be a part of that. When VR started up, I was actually on a little prototype group, and I desperately wanted to jump ship immediately, but I was the only programmer in this group, so that meant I would essentially be shutting it down. And that would have been kind of a jerk move. So I was a good coworker, I stayed. We finished the work we had planned to do, and then the first day I could, I moved my desk. So it's really at specific points in time where it makes sense to move. People aren't just kind of willy-nilly flying around.
I know that's what some people seem to have the impression of.
Yeah, no. No, once you get your desk in place, you're pretty rooted there for a while.
Thank you.
How about in the back over there?
I noticed in the door prototypes that pretty early on you had a lot of audio feedback. How often do you implement audio feedback for prototypes? And is that a common thing?
That's a good question. So for the purposes of this, this all happened some time ago, and I couldn't necessarily go back through our revision history to try to pull out these versions. So what I really did is I took our final door and I stripped out features as I went, which is a good argument for encapsulation, because taking the final door, the fourth one that you saw, the full working handle and everything, in order to bring that back to the third version, all I had to do was remove one line of code. To bring that back to the second version of the door, before we even had a latch or had hinge constraints, that was one more line of code. So if you're able to build your features so that each component of it is self-contained, then you can just sort of mix and match, plug and play, and you can be very fast about iterating on stuff like that. So try to remember that. If a feature is weaving through all the code, you're going to have a nightmare trying to maintain it and iterate on it.
And the center here, yeah. Oh, sorry. Someone. Go next.
It kind of sounds like you were working on the door for a long time, and it's making me wonder, if you can tell us, what were some other aspects of the game that you had to create? Like, did you have to do car doors as well, or did you have to do something completely unrelated?
Car doors. Sounds like you're fishing for marketing. Yeah, I wasn't just working on doors full time. I wasn't 8 hours a day. I usually you might have 8 or 10 features all going at once. Doors were actually the lightest of my work. I've been doing a bunch of work on hand interactions, which is why I can talk about this stuff of grabbing things and pulling the hand out, because I've been doing a lot of that work and solving those problems. That's been sort of the big me task. And there's so much cool stuff in there that I can't talk about, and it really frustrates me. So, if you'll have me in the future after this game has been announced, I would love to come back and sort of talk about some of this deeper, more technical stuff, so I don't have to be so catty about what's going on. Cagey, so cagey.
Yeah.
When HLVR ships,
Less leading questions.
You're leading the witness.
will the source code SDK be available, and will the door that you have created and demonstrated here, will it be available for people to use for custom apps and products?
That's a good question. As to the SDK, I don't know. Actually, that's not my department. But if there's an SDK based on our VR engine, then yes, the doors would be part of that. Yeah, I imagine they would. Absolutely, they would. They're a self-contained entity type now. So yeah, you'd be able to use them.
But you're in the yellow tree.
At Valve, they have a sort of fluid work structure, as we were talking about earlier, where employees can work in different areas, how they please, depending on what project it is. But also, quality of Valve is that they release very high-quality projects very infrequently. And I was wondering, how do you determine whether or not a project is worth, the sometimes decades, as humans too, that it takes to develop and update a game? How do you determine if a project is worth that?
Yeah, is it worth continuing? That's a tough question. We definitely try to avoid the sunk cost fallacy and say, well, we put 5 years into this, so we have to finish it. I guess there have been things that we've worked on for, on the scale of a year or more that we decided to set aside. We never really throw something out completely because it's a lot of good work that maybe someday we want to go back to. So yeah, it's kind of up to the team. As far as deciding when it's good enough to go out, that's absolutely the team's decision. Once we've decided we're going to ship this VR game, right? So it's really up to the people that are working on it to say, yes, we're happy with it, we're proud of this, we want people to play it. If we're not proud of it, we don't want people to play it, and we're going to make sure that we are proud of it before we let you. And I know that that's frustrating. It's frustrating for us too. That's just it's the benefit that we have at Valve that we can just keep working until it's the way we want it. It's also kind of the curse of not having a producer breathing down your neck every day telling you, no, you have to ship by this date or all your money's gone. So it's a mixed blessing.
How about back there in the teal shirt?
So in the examples, I think you mentioned earlier that you were using indexed controllers. Have you experimented with like for example, the Vive Pro has some sort of hand tracking thing, I think, or like Leap Motion or something? Like what other sorts of input?
So I haven't personally experimented with those, but I would say that we have at least one piece of every single VR hardware that exists in the office, and some of those, I don't want to use an insulting word. Some of the things that have not necessarily hit large-scale production will be sort of towards the end of the timeline of actually testing them within the game. But it has always been Valve's primary goal that you be able to play our software on any device. And so we try to adhere to that. And sometimes it's difficult to get things to work with all devices, but I'm really excited about hand tracking input, like Leap Motion and stuff like that. I'm hoping that's the future of VR input. It's just, I'm not an expert in hardware, so I can't say that much about if it's possible.
I see we have about time for 4 or so more questions. Yeah, about back there, yeah.
It's kind of a weird question, but what is the front slot on the index for? Like, when you take off the plastic cover?
What is it for? It's actually for whatever you want it to be for. So as far as I know, from what I hear from the hardware people, I don't know, beyond that. Maybe they have ideas of things we could do with it in the future. I'm not aware of them personally. Their offices are about 3 floors below mine, so I don't hear a lot of what's happening down there.
How about here in the check shirt?
My question was, is the snack bar at Valve still top tier?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. There's one on every floor. It's gotten better. When I started at Valve, it was only 80 people, and the kitchen was Hot Pockets and potato chips primarily. And I ate a lot of those summers of testing Half-Life 2. But, people are more health conscious now. So we have a salad bar and a fruit bar, but we still have the full complement of candy and chips and all the good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get a tour, and it was a very impressive snack bar. Okay, we have 2 more. We'll do one from this side. How about right here? Yep.
So were there any other door prototypes that you didn't show that kind of were surprising in the way that they failed?
Nothing that I can think of off the top of my head. I pretty much tried to pull out the most interesting ones for this presentation, because I was terrified that talking about doors was going to be wildly uninteresting. So I picked the most interesting ones. There were lots of little subtle things. The 2 slides I had at the end of other considerations add about 100 to that. And some are so deep and intricate that it would be ridiculous to even try to talk about them. But there was other stuff, but these were sort of the big overarching discoveries that also sort of apply to VR in general.
Who has a good final question?
Right here. I see you raise your hand every time.
Oh, yeah. My question. Oh.
No. Yeah, you go.
You go ahead.
Long hair.
All right. My question is, what's like the most challenging part of your job that just kind of is there anything that's a part of your job where you just think about it every day and you're like, wow, this is really a brick wall, and how much of that difficulty is specific to your job at Valve, and how much of it is more broad in terms of being development?
I would say the types of brick walls that I hit on a daily basis are specific to tasks that I'm trying to accomplish and just failing at, beating my head against a brick wall, almost literally. That's usually the biggest problem. In general, I don't feel like there's a lot that's in the way, even industry-wide. Part of that is because being at Valve provides you a lot of leeway, so I don't have a ton of constraints externally other than what the game is calling for. Really, my primary focus is the game, and I don't have to worry about much else, which is a really nice thing.
Actually, I also saw you raising your hand a lot too, if you want to. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, first question is, what is your involvement with Team Fortress 2? And second, is there any possibilities for Valve to bring their games into the Nintendo Switch?
So Team Fortress 2, I actually had very little involvement until we did the Orange Box. Then I worked a bunch on the multiplayer for the Xbox 360 version. But the game itself was pretty much, I was in Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 land at that time. So I was on a parallel track, so I didn't have much to do with that one. Bringing games to the Switch, I'm open to the idea. We're always open to new opportunities. It's just whether it works for us and whether it works for the other party. So I don't really know. Sorry.
Thank you, yeah. Okay, great. So the next step is going to be a tour open to anyone who wants to see the school, whether you're interested in school or not, or just want to see what DigiPen's all about. After we give Kerry a big round of applause. Great. So that tour will be leaving shortly from the front where you checked in, if you'd like to join on that. Kerry will be sticking around just for a little bit to casually chat, and if you want to mingle amongst yourselves, meet some cool people. And then if you do go on the tour, he'll still be around, so you won't be missing out on anything. We'd love to show you the school, and thanks so much for coming, everyone.